Quick, I'll give you 3 seconds to think of 3 shoe brands. Did you think of Nike? Of course you did. If we talk about shoes, no brand beats Nike. You can look at all the websites in the internet, GQ, Help Shoe, and other marketing ones. Nike is undoubtedly the most famous shoe brand in the world. But did you know that the brand is the project of a track and field athlete and his coach from Oregon? Which would make you wonder, how on earth did they build the Nike empire that we know and love today? Let's talk about it. Phil Hampson Knight was born in Portland, Oregon on February 24, 1938. He was the son of a lawyer turned newspaper publisher. Knight was already in love with sports at a young age and dreamt of becoming a famous athlete. In fact, he worked as a tabulator of sports scores for the Oregonian publication. Phil studied business at the University of Oregon and joined their then famous track and field team. This is where he met the person that would become the co-founder of his empire, his coach, Bill Bowerman. According to some students at the university, Coach Bowerman had a fiercely competitive nature and was fond of modifying shoes to improve its performance in track and field. He acquired this skill from a local shoemaker who taught him how to repair and modify shoes. Knight and Bowerman immediately became friends, an instant connection. In fact, Knight was the first student who tried one of Bowerman's modified shoes. Funny enough, Knight became the tester because he wasn't the team's best athlete and was, in a way, expendable. That having said, Knight liked how the shoe felt and even recommended it to his teammate Otis. And in the 1960 Olympics, Otis used Bowerman's modified shoes to compete in the 400-meter dash. After graduating from the University of Oregon, Phil Knight attended Stanford for his master's degree. While there, Knight wrote a thesis where he recommended that companies relocate their production from Germany to Japan, where the labor cost was much cheaper. That way, the businesses would earn even more revenue. In 1962, when Knight finished his master's, he went to Kobe, Japan, where he discovered Tiger, a famous running shoe brand in Japan. Knight immediately thought of importing the shoes to America. So he met with Onitsuka Co., the producer of the shoes. One of their first questions to Knight was the name of his company. Of course, he didn't have any company yet, so it took him a while to reply. Suddenly, the blue ribbons hanging in his house came to mind, and that's when he blurted out the name Blue Ribbon Sports. After the meeting, Knight became the official distributor of Tiger shoes in the western part of the United States. It took 1 year for the shoes to arrive in America, so Knight got a job as an accountant in Portland, and when the shoes finally came, he immediately sent 2 pairs to an old friend, his former coach, Bill Bowerman. Knight hoped that Bowerman would buy the shoes and endorse them to his athletes, but instead, Bowerman took it a step further. The track and field coach loved the shoes. Thus, he called Knight to partner with him in the company and offered product design ideas. On January 25, 1964, Blue Ribbon Sports became official. Since Bowerman was a longtime track and field coach known nationwide, athletes respected his opinion. A shoe with his stamp of approval would definitely attract buyers. Their first pairs were sold from the trunk of a Plymouth car. They went to track meets themselves to seek the athletes. In 1966, Blue Ribbon Sports finally opened its first outlet store. Eventually, the company hired more salesmen that would go to the events to sell the shoes. Most of them were ex-runners who were interested and knowledgeable about the product. Bowerman took charge of the company's creative department. Every time a shipment arrives from Onitsuka, he gets a pair, takes it apart, and examines it so he can think of possible improvements. He would note these improvements and send them to Onitsuka for them to be implemented on the next shipment of shoes. Eventually, Bowerman was able to design his very own shoe and used Onitsuka's factory to manufacture it. I'm sure you've heard of this one. It turned out to be the Nike Cortez. Because business was great, Knight wanted to negotiate with Onitsuka. Remember that at this time, Blue Ribbon Sports was the official distributor of Tiger shoes only in the western part of the US, and Knight wanted to change that. He wanted their company to be the official distributor for Onitsuka for all of the US. At first, Onitsuka was hesitant, as they always saw Blue Ribbon as a small company. But when Knight told them they had a new office on the East Coast, Onitsuka finally agreed. The only problem was that Blue Ribbon needed an East Coast office. Knight only said it so Onitsuka would make a deal with them. Now, they must spend a lot of money to build a new office. Knight made the company public to fund it and tried to get investors. But no one took a chance. It was heartbreaking for Knight. But luckily, a Nike employee by the name of Bob Wodell swooped in and saved them. Bob's parents poured all their savings of $8,000 into Blue Ribbon Sports, just so they could build a new office and continue their partnership with Onitsuka. They dodged a bullet, but another problem came up. In the following months, Onitsuka was still exporting the shoes to Blue Ribbon very slowly, even if their market got bigger. Soon enough, Knight discovered that Onitsuka was prioritizing their Japanese market, and they only exported what was left to Blue Ribbon. They are slow at implementing the improvements Bowerman suggested, and sometimes Onitsuka ignores them. It got even worse when Onitsuka didn't want to renew its contract with the Blue Ribbon. Knight couldn't believe it, especially since their sales numbers were great. Eventually, he discovered the truth. Onitsuka had dealt with more prominent distributors in the US, breaking their contracts. Thus, they couldn't continue their partnership. For Knight and Bowerman, the first step to strike out independently is to replace the company's name. A promise of a new beginning, one where they're not merely distributors for Onitsuka, but one where they actually make their own shoes. Knight thought of the name Dimension 6, but it wasn't very popular with the employees. One day, another employee suggested the name Nike. Initially, Phil was confused, as he didn't know what it was. Nike is actually the goddess of victory from Greek mythology. Knight didn't like the name at first, but they went for it because they were out of options. A new name needs a new logo. So Knight hired a graphic design student from Portland State named Carolyn Davidson. When she showed Knight the swoosh design, he liked it and paid Carolyn a measly $35. Don't worry though, Carolyn got a lot of opportunities after crafting the design. In 1971, the Nike we know today with its swoosh logo was born. One of their first products was the new version of Cortez, which now has the swoosh logo instead of Onitsuka's. And instead of using one manufacturer, Knight made deals with many of them from different parts of the world to make production even faster. In the following years, their business did great. They received a massive boost during the 1972 Olympics, where many athletes wore their shoes. In fact, in 1977 only, they earned $28 million that year. Nike continued to expand. Phil only invested most of the profit into making the company even bigger. Knight and Bowerman thought Nike's growth and success would be smooth sailing. Still, they were mistaken, as another problem loomed in the background. Nike was becoming increasingly popular with the public, which alerted the other brands, who were scared that Nike would eclipse them. Among these brands were Keds and Converse, and they took action. They used the American selling price against Nike, an old law before the Great Depression. According to ASP, shoes that are imported to America from an outside manufacturer are required to pay some sort of tax if a shoe manufactured in the US is similar. The tax will amount to 20% of the American shoe's selling price, and they must pay this tax for every shoe they can sell. Back then, this was done to ensure more American-made shoes would be sold in the country. It was simple for Nike's competitors to know the latter was imported from Japan. They simply made shoes similar to Nike's and raised the prices, so Nike's taxes would also be high per sold shoe. Knight was shocked when a letter came to his stable from Customs, demanding them to pay their debt of $25 million, all from the taxes. Nike was not gonna fold. They went to court against their rival brands. They also informed the public of their situation involving other brands to get the people's support, and they did, as many people bought their products and their sales increased. After a while, rival brands started to feel the cost of their court battle that lasted for 3 years. They went for a settlement where Nike only paid $9 million instead of $25 million. At that point, Nike was already a juggernaut in the shoe business, and their sales totaled $440 million. So, Knight settled. In 1980, Knight and Bowerman made Nike public. Ordinary people who worked 9-to-5 jobs can now invest in it. And only 46% of the company remained owned by Phil Knight when this happened. But because Nike was doing so well, he was also becoming a wealthy man. But what made Knight truly happy was when he paid the Waddell family back, who invested $8,000 in the company just so they could stay afloat. The family's investment grew from $8,000 to a whopping $1.6 million. Nike's success continued, and they struck deals with China, making them the first American shoe brand to ever do so. Soon after, they also ventured out and started manufacturing products other than shoes. They sold shirts, socks, and different kinds of sportswear. Nike became successful because Knight was a fearless risk-taker. And in 1984, he took another risk on an athlete that would take Nike to a different stratosphere. Michael Jeffrey Jordan was the third overall pick in the 1984 NBA draft. Before he played a single game in the NBA, he already had offers from different brands to be an endorser. At that time, athletes were very strong endorsers of shoes, and even at a young age, Mike already dreamt of becoming an endorser, particularly for his favorite shoe brand, Adidas. It seemed like a done deal, but Adidas wasn't willing to offer a signature shoe for Mike, and this is where Nike came in. Nike offered Jordan a 5-year, $2.5 million, where he would receive $500,000 yearly. This was a groundbreaking contract regarding the figures at that time, especially for a rookie who hadn't played a complete game in the NBA. They didn't know how good Jordan would be in the NBA, but Phil took the risk, and it paid off big time. Because even today, Nike's Air Jordan shoes are still their biggest earner and garnered $5.1 billion in 2022. In the following years, Nike was able to sign more famous athletes, including superstars like LeBron James, Tiger Woods, and Kyrie Irving. It seemed everything would go smoothly for Nike, but in 2001, they were dealt with considerable controversy. A BBC documentary condemned Nike about their factory in Cambodia. It was focused on 6 young girls who worked 16 hours daily for their factory, even on the weekends. This is when the people found out about Nike's use of child labor and the poor working conditions under which they subject their factory workers. The workers didn't have any access to water and were not allowed to go to the restroom during working hours. And after a grueling day of working, they only receive $1.25 a day, way below the minimum wage. This was familiar to Nike. They were also exposed during a 1991 documentary by labor activist Jeffrey Ballinger called Behind the Swoosh. In 1997, 10,000 workers from Nike's factories in Indonesia protested against their meager wages that sometimes get delayed. After 1 year, workers from Nike's Chinese factories had a strike because of the poor working conditions in the factory. Nike was able to get past these allegations. Still, this time, with this BBC documentary, the people won't let them off the hook that easily. Groups like the Education for Justice, Global Exchange, and Students Against Sweatshop Labor have protested against them. Because of this, many partners backed out from their deals with Nike, fearing that they would get dragged down by the company's bad image. Thus, in 2002, Nike took action. They created a code of conduct where they would immensely improve the working conditions in all their factories worldwide. In 2004, according to their responsibility report, they received positive feedback for their improvements and promised to build on them. In June 2016, Phil Knight officially stepped down as chairman of the company after holding the position for years. That having the culture that he cultivated remained very much alive in the company. In 2017, Nike took another risk, this time without their previous leader. During the U.S. national anthem, football star Colin Kaepernick kneeled to protest racial injustice and police brutality, and after which Nike hired him for an ad. The advertisement encouraged people to believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. Of course, they paired it with their iconic line, "Just do it." Many people boycotted Nike as it did cost them a 2.5% drop in their stocks. But eventually, their bold move paid off. A lot of people who supported Kaepernick's convictions came through for Nike. They bought a lot of Nike's products, which led to Nike's value blowing up to $6 billion, while their sales were 31% higher than the previous year. From a company that sold shoes in the trunk of a Plymouth car to becoming the most famous shoe brand in the world, Nike's story, as well as their founders Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman, are proof that hard work, determination, and one's willingness to take risks can take you to your wildest dreams.